The Apocryphon of John is one of the most intriguing Gnostic texts. Like all the Gnostic Gospels, the Church considers this heretical since it contains teachings that differ in many ways from mainstream Christianity. The Apocryphon of John talks about several dharmic concepts like the cycle of birth and death, turning away from the material world, humans living in ignorance of the divine spirit within, and other such concepts. The Apocryphon of John is one of the most misunderstood texts, and various interpretations of it from the academic to the conspiratorial float around. There are 4 separate surviving manuscripts of the secret book of John. 3 of these were found as part of the Nag Hammadi corpus, while the 4th was found independently 50 years earlier from another site in Egypt. All 4 versions are conservatively dated to the 4th century. Under the reign of emperors like Constantine and Theodosius, the Nicene Church could have you put to death for possessing these texts, so not many copies survived. As mentioned, the Apocryphon of John does talk about several dharmic concepts. But there is one minor perceived difference, and this is the issue of Gnostic dualism, which again is not to be confused with Hindu dualism, which is Dvaita. In the Sethian Gnostic dualist school, the creation of the material world is attributed to a hostile demonic force, the Demiurge. The Demiurge creates the material world in order to trap the spiritual elements. The Apocryphon of John calls this Demiurge Yaldabaoth. The point that irked mainstream practitioners of Nicene Christianity was that the description of Yaldabaoth as an egotistical creator of humans seemed to be a description, or at the least a caricature, of the God of the Old Testament. And that caused outrage. The Sethian Gnostic school does not encompass all of the early Christian Gnostics. Valentinian Gnostics, another Gnostic movement founded by Valentinus at around the year 150, insisted that while the Demiurge might have some negative qualities, such as arrogance and lust, he certainly could not be considered evil and actually has a role in the process of liberation. Now, this is more in line with the Eastern faiths. Some people have compared the Hindu god Brahma to Yaldabaoth, but this is not entirely correct. Brahma does have his flaws as narrated in the Puranas, but Brahma is also portrayed as a benevolent god in his own right, and in fact, he actually is the person narrating those events in which he acted out on his instincts. He himself narrates his flaws in these Puranic texts and is directly commissioned by the infinite God energy to aid in the process of creation. And I've made a more detailed video on the flaws of Brahma if you want to take a look at it. Coming back to the Apocryphon of John, the text details a revelation by a vision that appears before the Apostle John. The vision initially talks about an infinite God energy similar to the Brahman, referred to as the monad, the inexpressible one. The text states, "The one is the invisible spirit. Since everything exists within it, it does not exist within anything. Since it is not dependent on anything, it is eternal." This is the idea of an infinite, all-pervading God energy. This is similar to the description of the Brahman in Vedantin texts. The Chandogya Upanishad, an ancient Vedantin text, states, "All this is Brahman. Everything comes from Brahman, everything goes back to Brahman, and everything is sustained by the Brahman." The Apocryphon of John moves on to talking about how the self-awareness of the infinite God energy, the inexpressible monad, creates an emanation of itself called Babelo. It states, "His self-aware thought, Enoia, came into being. Appearing to him in the effulgence of his light, she stood before him." Again, this aspect of the unmanifest infinite manifesting itself as an energy with capacity is detailed in the Hindu Puranas. The Shiva Purana states, "The being, having no form of its own, wished to create, in the course of its own sport, a form of its own endowed with all power, qualities, and knowledge. Coming back to the Apocryphon of John, Barbelo and the monad give rise to light and mind. Light is also referred to as Christ, the autogenes. In Eastern parlance, this translates to Swayambhu, self-manifested. Together, the light and mind create 12 realms rising out of the 4 lights. In one of these realms, Sophia, whose wisdom, intends to create an image from herself. She engages in creation, but a creation without the participation of the masculine. So what does this mean in Eastern parlance? It means that it is a creation of intellect, but not of intellect and spirit. Sophia's creation was Yaldabaoth. Her creation was imperfect. Yaldabaoth is described as a dragon with a lion's head. Some texts describe him as a lion-faced serpent as well. Now, scared, Sophia throws Yaldabaoth out of the realm of the immortal beings. Yaldabaoth inherits some of the power from Sophia and himself starts the process of creation. He starts creating worlds and beings in ignorance. Yaldabaoth creates 7 spheres of heaven and 5 spheres of abyss. Yaldabaoth then creates other beings called archons and appoints them as authorities to rule the 12 realms created by him. These archons, in turn, create other authorities, and the total number comes to 365. The word ruler translates to archons in Greek. Gnostic consider these archons to be negative because of their actions, which we will talk about. After this process of creation is complete, Yaldabaoth declares in arrogance, "I am a jealous God, and there is no God but me." Yaldabaoth creates these worlds based on the realms in the higher planes, but still his ignorance and ego is evident in these creations. He is clearly not aware of the oneness. This statement by Yaldabaoth also seems to be a caricature of the externalizations of God that were prevalent in other faiths at that time. Material creation without the innate understanding of the knowledge that God energy is infinite and permeates all is one of ignorance. It is merely a creation of matter without the knowledge of the spirit, Prakriti without the Purusha. Again, this is not an absence of, but rather an ignorance of. The spirit pervades all. The Brahman is all-pervading and infinite. Yaldabaoth inherits knowledge that allows him to create, but the wisdom is material, not transcendental. Now, Sophia's light, her knowledge, had dimmed, and due to the loss of light, she falls from the higher realms. She repents on seeing the events that are taking place. When the higher realms hear her laments and prayers of repentance, the infinite God energy blesses her and elevates her to a higher level, but still not to her original condition. This again is a symbolism of the descent of wisdom. Wisdom, which was faith wisdom, has fallen into material wisdom, which has caused a descent of consciousness. The spirit then tries to help Sophia redeem her position. The spirit proclaims the existence of man and shows an image of man to Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth sees the image and hears the message. He immediately tells his subordinates, the archons, to create a man according to the image that was revealed to him. So the archons create the first man, Adam. But this creation is made subject to the 4 powers of the principal demons: grief, pleasure, desire, and fear. The creation does not move initially. 5 lights from the higher realms descend and advise Yaldabaoth to blow his spirit into man. According to the text, the 5 lights were sent down by the spirit in an effort to trick Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth blows his spirit into man, and on being infused by the spirit, the human, arose. The creation, man, became resplendent, much to the envy of the subordinates of Yaldabaoth. Man had become greater than those who created him. Again, you can see the symbolism in this. Yaldabaoth had the spirit all through. He was ignorant of it. Arrogant, yes. Jealous, yes. But nothing exists outside the infinite God energy. Without the knowledge of unity and the externalization of consciousness, human is made subject to pleasure, grief, desire, and fear, all of which drives us away from spiritual progression. The archons, disturbed by man's greatness, cast him into the depths of the material world. The spirit then tries to help man and sends down a helper. The light-filled epinoia emerged and after teaching man, remained hidden in man. The hidden power in man is epinoia, the power of thought, the power of conceptualization. This taught man his true potential, the story of his descent, and how he could eventually ascend. This power of thought will eventually help man overcome the ignorance that has led to his being bound in the material world. The archons then put Adam into a new body, one that, according to the text, is chained with forgetfulness and subject to death. They place him in a paradise so he could forget his real nature. And here is where things get really interesting. Paradise is essentially a description of the Garden of Eden, complete with the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. The archons caution Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and of course, Adam disobeys them and eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Again, this whole thing is an allegory. If the archons did fashion the paradise, why would they put the tree there, and why would they point Adam to the tree and ask him not to eat it? They could have put him in another paradise without the tree. This is an allegory to the attraction that the material world holds for those ignorant of their true nature. Every move of Yaldabaoth seems to go against him. Even in the narration, you can see that he is not very effective at playing the bad guy. The Apocryphon of John states here that the disobedience of Adam, which led to his eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, was because of the epinoia, the power of thought in Adam. Now Yaldabaoth sees this and he is even more furious. He makes Adam even more forgetful, dulls his perception so that man cannot comprehend the true nature of who he is. As Adam is dulled into sleep, Yaldabaoth tries to remove the epinoia from within Adam and tries to put it into another creature he fashioned. This creature, the text says, is Eve, the first woman. Adam wakes up, and as soon as Adam sees Eve, his forgetfulness disappears and both their minds awaken. So now both Adam and Eve have recognized their true nature, and again, unsurprisingly, Yaldabaoth is furious. He defiles Eve, and as a result, Eve gives birth to two children. Their names, state the Apocryphon of John, are Elohim and Yahweh. Elohim is deceptively named as Cain and Yahweh as Abel. Now this is one possible reason for this gospel being termed heretical. But here again, a literal analysis of this narrative presents some logical issues. Yaldabaoth himself tries to take the epinoia from Adam and puts it into Eve. Then he is furious that Eve has the epinoia and defiles her. Yaldabaoth does not seem to have any semblance of control. Yaldabaoth is a symbol of collective materialism, the force that in ignorance tries to possess the sacred feminine, Prakriti, without knowledge of the Purusha. Rather than being a devious and powerful antagonist, Yaldabaoth is portrayed as a fool of crude nature. In fact, the two other names of Yaldabaoth, Saklas and Samael, refer to this trait. Saklas in Aramaic translates to fool and Samai translates to blind. The representation of Yaldabaoth as a beast with the face of a lion and the body of a serpent too is a symbolism. a symbolism that represented a being fueled by material passions. Yaldabaoth is ignorant of the truth and blinded by materialism. He remains unenlightened. In the last part of the Apocryphon of John, Adam and Eve beget a son, Seth, whose children populate the world. The text then delves into a series of questions and answers. The most important question is this: what happens to the souls who do not understand their true nature? What happens to them after death? The response given to this question clearly talks about reincarnation and the cycle of birth and death and knowledge leading to liberation. The answer states, in those people, the artificial spirit has grown strong and they have gone astray. Their souls are burdened, drawn into wickedness, and cast into forgetfulness. When they come forth from the body, such a soul is given over to the powers created by the rulers, the archons, bound in chains and cast into prison again. Around and around it goes until it manages to become free from the forgetfulness through knowledge, and so eventually it becomes perfect and is saved. So clearly, it talks about reincarnation where the soul is given a new body and put through various cycles of birth and death until it attains the knowledge that is prerequisite for liberation. The Apocryphon of John was the Gnostic writer's attack on the externalization of the patriarchal God energy that was being pushed to the masses. A jealous God they had to obey or risk eternal damnation in hell. The Gnostics wanted no part of this narrative. They declared this concept of God to be ignorant and full of arrogance. In fact, many other texts talk about the ignorance and arrogance of Yaldabaoth, but do consider Yaldabaoth an instrument for gaining true knowledge. In the Gnostic text on the origin of the world, Yaldabaoth's son Sabaoth condemns his father for his ignorance and is enlightened by Sophia. So this is just a difference between the state of ignorance and enlightenment. God energy, the Brahman, the inexpressible monad, the infinite consciousness by its very definition is infinite and all-pervading. The exegesis on the soul, yet another Gnostic text, declares, wise men of old gave the soul a feminine name. Indeed, she is female in her nature as well. She even has a womb. The text then talks about how the soul defiled itself by giving itself onto others. Again, a reference to the material attachments that cast an illusion over the knowledge of reality. On realizing the true nature, the soul will regain her proper state. In fact, in the Pistis Sophia, the Yaldabaoth already exists, and Sophia is a passive figure who is tricked by Yaldabaoth. She is cast into the lower material realms of chaos and actively tormented by beings that she had nothing to do with. Again, an allegory to the descent of wisdom and its corruption by material forces. The Apocryphon of John details the fall of faith wisdom and its resurrection by knowledge of the ultimate reality. Yaldabaoth and the Archons, symbolic or not, can be thought of as instruments that aim to keep people trapped in samsara and the cycle of birth and death. The demiurge is collective materialism keeping the mind, the spark within, and by extension the consciousness bogged down in the material. If the soul continues to be defiled by its dalliances with the material, it will be caught in the endless cycle of birth and death. The knowledge of our true nature will guide one to liberation. In summary, similar to the Eastern Dharmic faiths, the Apocryphon of John talks about the divine spark within and how the ignorance of this knowledge causes the soul to be caught in an endless cycle of birth and death. It also talks about knowledge of our true self as a means to liberation. More importantly, the Apocryphon of John talks against philosophies that use fear and guilt as a means to salvation. When we look at all these ancient faiths, Vedantic Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, etc., it's very imperative for me to point this out. While they have their share of similarities, they might have slight philosophical differences too. But as long as they believe in the divine spark within and righteous conduct leading to liberation from the cycle of birth and death, their conduct in this world will not be too different from each other. It is safe to assume that no Gnostics and Vedantins would go to war against each other on account of these minor differences in their philosophies, because the aim is to transcend this material world and get away from the cycle of birth and death and not be bogged down by it. As always, the known is a drop and the unknown an ocean. Peace.